Hi, everybody. Welcome to Badge Clinic on June 3rd, 2020. It's Don Prezant here with partner in crime, Serge Ravet, and a few other partners in crime here for a very interesting session from Andy Kilsby of Otago Polytechnic. I met Andy just a few months ago when I was pulling together a project, research project on business models in higher education. And for me, this is the key highlight from that research report. And I'm very pleased to be welcoming Andy here today, who got up very early to give us the privilege of listening to him. So I'm going to pass over right now to Andy, and please take it away.
Kia ora, everyone. Atamarie from the early hours of a New Zealand morning, so it is June 4 here, the tyranny of distance. I'm going to hopefully work through a PowerPoint this morning. Hopefully it won't be death by PowerPoint. I do encourage questions and interactivity on the way through, so I'll just see if I can take over, and we shall take it from here. So essentially, my personal journey with Edubits has been over the past nearly 2 years, and essentially my background, I'm not actually from education as my lexicon may actually prove. I'm actually a reformed banker, so I've entered education over the past 4 years, and I'm certainly enjoyed the change. I dug a tunnel, escaped, and I think I'm in the right spot now. So Edubits, as you may or may not be aware, Edubits is a brand that Otago Polytechnic has developed in relation to its micro-credentialing work. And so Edubits was essentially founded in 2016. And since that time, we've sort of walked an interesting journey in terms of essentially trying to commercialise this as an entity, as a semi-autonomous entity within Otago Polytechnic. Essentially, our take on micro-credentials, and it seems that my PowerPoint is getting away on me. Essentially, we're focusing on naturally occurring evidence of competency as opposed to, I guess, demonstration of understanding. But I think it's actually important to note that Edubits needs to be something that solves a problem. So if the context of why we want to apply a micro-credential solution is to ensure that people have an understanding, and that's the standard that needs to be set, then certainly setting up a verification of understanding is sufficient, so long as it's solving the problem we're actually trying to achieve. But we like to actually focus on naturally occurring evidence because we think that obviously integrates better into a real life, a workplace context. So that's been our take to focus on that. We use the Acclaim platform, obviously formerly Credly. Certainly at the time we were first setting up that service, Credly was the dominant player, but certainly open to other suggestions, and I'm certainly interested in listening to the conversation of this forum. So what are Edubits? Essentially quality assured micro-credentials, small qualifications, and they represent skill and or knowledge that is worthwhile in its own right. So people essentially submit their evidence of their skill online through a digital platform. That evidence is assessed against academically rigorous criteria. So when we develop an Edubit, we put it through essentially the same process of development as a normal qualification. Same, but commensurate, because obviously if you are looking to apply the same quality process, the amount of resource you need to put into a full qualification, you'd soon be out of business in terms of the requisite size of the qualification. So essentially too, and this is obviously telling, I think this forum stuff you already know, obviously in the representation is a digital badge, it's shareable, it's also obviously, has the protection of the Acclaim platform in terms of its validity and verification. So how do we make them work? So essentially people submit their evidence of their skills online, and that evidence, we're trying to tie into real world examples where we can best fit that. And obviously, we, like the rest of the world, particularly in higher education, are endeavouring to sort of chart that course of how do we embed ourselves into the workplace context, into the real life context, away from the dominant provision in bricks and mortar campus. So we think that at the heart of all of that is something as small as a micro-credential, which can be the platform for a far more flexible learning approach. So again, Edubits are shared online, and we can work through that in terms of obviously our partner in Credly. Sarah will recognise this slide. She created it. I'd like to acknowledge copyright where I need to. Essentially, our take on micro-credentialing, with, I guess, the philosophy that the micro-credential is at the base of, I guess, at the cornerstone of this learning engagement. It then ties into a very flexible learning approach. If we are concentrating on building RPL micro-credentials as our sort of our raison d'etre, then where the learning actually comes from, how a person learns the skill or knowledge, is we're almost agnostic on how that learning occurred. Now, I'm going to contradict myself in terms of where we're currently at as a business model, and that we're now focusing on directly linked learning and earning micro-credentialing. But in essence, if the micro-credential is built on the basis that it doesn't sort of almost matter where the learning comes from, then it becomes a very flexible instrument. So this learning approach really basically takes you through a very short pathway of what a learner could expect when they come to an Edubit. Essentially, what we want to do first is give the learner the opportunity to assess whether their skills are going to be sufficient before they submit evidence towards the credential. So a micro-assessment takes place. If it's deemed the learner should actually proceed to the full assessment, great, off they go. They submit their evidence to the micro-credential, and we wish them success. If it's deemed there's a gap, then we actually can refer the learner to micro-learning. What is the gap that actually you need to fill before you actually take this up? So it actually provides that very flexible approach, enabling a range of learning solutions to actually be put into place. And this is where I think this is the secret sauce in terms of how institutions can actually provide those or opportunities which are more reflective of a current world of blended learning, online learning, learning from multiple sources, and it positions, I think, the institution in a different light. What is our actual role, and in terms of our relationship with learners and education. It starts to, I guess, unbundle some of the traditions of, like I said, campus-based bricks and mortar education. So this flexible approach is central to our strategy with Edubits and micro-credentialing. In terms of the micro-credential landscape in New Zealand, we are recognised, I guess, in terms of around the world, at least, as of having a framework or a system of sorts. So we've made a stab at a central government level to actually create a context where micro-credentialing can occur. In New Zealand, we have a qualifications authority, so we are a single state. So we have only the one education system. It's not a multi-state system. So a New Zealand Qualifications Authority, hence NZQA, and we have a New Zealand qualifications framework where all of our recognised qualifications are actually held. NZQA, we're looking around a corner. We were probably looking around the corner a little bit earlier than NZQA. And so they funded a pilot in 2018, 2017, 2018 to see where micro-credentialing could go. And that's where the concept of Edubits was born. We essentially created this digital platform which enabled us to house and promote and market the Edubits that we've created, of which there are nearly 130. And that was slightly different from other institutional takes on micro-credentialing which focused on a single area. Our take on it was, could we actually almost build a factory? Could we actually see if this enterprise had scale? Funding streams are available in the New Zealand context, albeit in a convoluted fashion. I won't bore you with the details because that's why I no longer have here. But in terms of actually charting the course here, we can actually avail of government funding to fund a micro-credential. Most of our activity across the sector to date has been, I'd call it gap fill and value add. Given we have a very robust qualifications framework, the Qualifications Authority is very hot on a lack of duplication in the sector. So if someone has come up with that bright idea first and are able to register their micro-credential or their qualification on the framework, that is the one that stands. You've got to demonstrate to NZQA material difference to another qualification and have strong industry support before they will consent to a new qualification being added to the framework. So a lot of that stuff has been really about what are the gaps in the education sector, what are the emerging technologies, what are the things that current qualifications don't quite reach. One thing that NZQA have been incredibly hot on is not allowing disaggregation of qualifications into smaller credentials. We sort of have a more pragmatic approach to that, in that whilst we respect the qualifications framework and certainly the value of a longer form credential, sometimes there's important learning and an important experience within a qualification that industry and learners value. So making that individually standalone available is also doing our job. So we're at a bit of a philosophical juncture, which is where I'll bring in, I guess, the last two acronyms on my slide here, ROVE and ROVID. ROVE is Review of Vocational Education. The New Zealand vocational education sector has been subject to a 2-year review, and we're seeing some large-scale structural reform in terms of the merger of all 16 New Zealand polytechnics into one entity. That will see opportunities potentially for a service like Edubits, if that combined institution sees value in one brand and one platform for New Zealand and micro-credentialing. ROVID, that's a line which I'm borrowing from my immediate formal manager, obviously in reference to the current crisis, and that has sort of, I guess, accelerated the pace of change in New Zealand with regard to structural reform in response to the COVID epidemic and what will happen, I guess, in New Zealand education in what looks like a long, sustained downturn economically. Any questions to date? Because I'm rattling through here. No? Right, we'll carry on.
Thanks.
Sorry, Serge? Yep.
I said not yet, thanks.
Not yet. Oh, excellent. So this is sort of, I guess, our overall philosophy is how do we take the college to the company? And this is a line borrowed from our time working with Sarah and the good folks at Humber College, and also VIA in Denmark. But more pertinently, we visited in June 2019 to work with a couple of clients of Humber's to unpack, what micro-credentialing could mean in a commercial context. And, it was actually really heartening because sometimes you do these pitches to corporates, and particularly when you're a simple country boy from New Zealand in a way and coming to the big smoke of Toronto, you want to ensure that, your message is consistent. And certainly it was pleasing to hear one of the executives after we completed the initial part of the presentation say, right, I get this. You're trying to take the college to the company. And this is, I guess, this is the heart of the opportunity, I think, for global education from an institutional perspective, and where micro-credentialing is a significant part of the solution. in terms of their relevance in providing education, not just in a commercial sense in terms of satisfying company needs, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in terms of a case study of a particular Edubit that we've developed, but also from an equity and access perspective. Learners now should expect that institutions are responsive and flexible to their requirements when they require education. And the role of an institution, therefore, needs to adjust with that. And I could talk for hours, I think, around whether our goal is or our role as a guide or navigator. So college to company is a sort of underlying philosophy for us, and certainly one that our partners at Humber College share as well, and also our partners in Denmark and at VIA. So essentially, this is an opportunity, I guess, that we work with a major global brand company in New Zealand. There aren't that many, so you could probably guess which one it might be if you are familiar with New Zealand at all. But they wanted to ensure that they had the learning that they were providing. Looks like this is on Auto Connect, so I'll keep us on the same page. This is, I guess, one of the interesting anomalies with regard to micro-credentialing in the academic context is often it seems to be related to lower level skills. I used the analogy at the start of this presentation about making coffee, and often it seems like it's the more simplistic skills that are focused on by institutions. In this case, this globally important company has a sales team, and they're aiming to use, I guess, badging and micro-credentials to embed their training, to ensure that that the training had value. So this is, I guess, one of the key benefits for businesses is ensuring that there's a return on investment for their training. But one of the things was they wanted to make this an aspirational goal for the absolute top achievers in what was, their crack sales unit. So from that perspective, it sort of put the value of the micro-credential right at the top of the food chain, as opposed to, I guess, some other approaches where it tends to be at that more, composite or simplistic level. So that was an interesting approach. So yeah, they have a great training program, and they wanted to find a way that, did people learn something? Did they apply? When they went back to their desk on Monday, what happened? What was different? So that was the challenge for us, to actually try and address that for them. And this is obviously a statistic which is, I'm again telling you stuff you already know. It's addressing the transfer of learning problem, and that's obviously this space is well crowded with corporate training, and whether or not that is effective is a major challenge. So they approached us simply because, I guess, from our perspective, competency-based assessment is our jam. We were already an existing player with Edubits, albeit just starting out. And so effectively, the four elements there in terms of learning design and experience, a competency-based assessment process in terms of Edubits, we've proven that. Academic rigor in terms of our design process, and the credibility of Otago Polytechnic. So all of those things were things that Air New Zealand were looking for in the space. Whoops, I just let the cat out of the bag. So effectively, when we dug into this, one of the things that they were really, really hot on was confidentiality. They wanted to ensure that the details of learners were kept confidential, and also the nature of those workplace experiences. You can imagine when you're looking at evidence that's generated in a non-academic and a real-world setting has some sensitivity. So that was a key element for them, was ensuring that there was digital compliance around security, and also ensuring we came with a process to provide confidentiality. Clearly, they wanted to also, their number two was, what have they learned, and are they applying what we've spent good money on in terms of this training program? so embedding that new learning into practice. The badge is a motivation. If it's integrated fully into a natural workplace event, there's a minimum impact on learners. So the additional tasks around uploading evidence and the like needs to be a minimum imposition on people's time. And therefore, we need to focus on naturally occurring evidence. One of the big challenges, and this is a challenge we still face, particularly too when the majority of our product in Edubits is assessment-only micro-credentials, it's academic language. Effectively, in Edubit on our site, the majority of our assessment-only micro-credentials are assessment methodologies. And so your customer interface is actually very short. 5 credit assessment-only micro-credential literally on the website will take you 35 seconds to read through, but because it's actually an academic construct and its interaction, utilizing academic language is sometimes a barrier, particularly too when you're applying this in a non-academic setting. So that, however, there is a rigor in terms of the words that we need to require or the lexicon we need to apply when we're actually ensuring these are quality assured micro-credentials. We've got to go and make these things accessible and pragmatic for learners to use. So there's always a tension there. So that was a key challenge for us to try and solve. And so fall in love with the problem, not the solution. I think design thinking, and one of the key things in terms of building a team is this is a key element, I think, in terms of people who can actually work best in this space. An instructional design approach is and certainly lean thinking is definitely 2 methodologies to apply to the development of micro-credentials at scale. So essentially, with this particular opportunity, obviously we were looking at trying to marry off those issues. And I think one of my colleagues has referred to these, and as you can see from the notes, as Franken competencies. They are quite wordy and quite detailed, but we're trying to actually provide that non-academic language, but still apply rigor. So there's that tension there. So you do tend to end up in a space of relatively wordy methodologies. So these are the assessed competencies that we've applied to this particular Edubit that we've designed for this company. Effectively, excuse me, that the key issue we're trying to be, or the key approach we're trying to be here is pragmatic. So again, too, this is a process map that actually looks at what the learners will actually go through. So in this context, they're a sales team. They have an engagement with customers, and they are recording evidence as they're working through as a natural part of their business of how those engagements are going. And that's the evidence they're accruing and building up over time in a portfolio or portfolio approach for their evidence. And so again, working them through what is actually still a work-related context and a work-related process. So that portfolio of evidence is then put together. So the CRM records in this particular instance are the sort of baseline evidence, the base rock evidence for this particular assessment of competency. We do need 2 things to tie that together though. An observational checklist from managers to say, yes, these are the behaviours I observed, and also reflection on the learner. How did that link back to the learning that I went on previously? Because again, the key issue we're trying to solve here, one of the key issues is return on investment for training. What did the people learn? How did they apply? So essentially, we've mapped to existing software that this firm was using, which was Salesforce. And effectively, that's mapping back into our Edubits field in the back end, because one of the things we wanted to do here is create a seamless approach for the learner in terms of their interaction. This then generates into a PDF of evidence where we can actually then redact client confidentiality or client-related information. So again, the confidentiality element starts to fly into space here. And from that perspective, that employee portfolio can then, we set up an API link back to from their CRM system at head office to our Edubits system to enable a seamless upload of evidence to satisfy the Edubit requirement. So what this meant was these employees actually never visited the Edubit site. They were engaged in this process purely through their employment and their training and their interaction with their existing work-based systems. And we've been able to harvest that evidence through to the Edubit site to complete our assessment and then issuing them a bespoke badge. So this process has been through a process of review and implementation. Unfortunately, ROVID, as we call it here, is rearing its head. As I alluded to or let out the bag before, this particular company, as you might imagine, has been extremely affected by the impact of COVID. And so our work with them isn't quite on hold, but certainly not. We're not looking to develop further micro-credentials for them as we originally planned, for the time being. But certainly that's not because they're not happy with the process, because for them this was the plan as we moved forward, was to actually build a transparent career path against identified badges for them to achieve, or the micro-credentials to achieve, and then that could actually relate to their aspirations for further career development. So for us, essentially, having a learner-centered assessment is primary to the overall problem. I'm sorry, I'm just keeping ahead of things there. Trying to actually remove the red tape for the client is the important thing. This is the college to company approach, and it's not just about learning methodologies. It's really about how do you make the stuff that's hard for us as educational institutions not hard for them. And again, a lot of that comes back to lexicon and language, but also just really fundamentally understanding the client need. And a lean approach, a design approach, brings it all back into, I guess, the big picture, which is we want to know that people do know things after we've actually interacted with training. So the opportunities for this, and this is obviously, it's great to have Sarah on this call this morning, because this has allowed us, with Edubits in particular and the exposure of this particular company, to have some credibility initially in terms of initiating conversations. And our work with Humber and Beer in Denmark is centered around an entity called the Global Polytechnic Alliance, which is essentially 3 like-minded institutions across the world saying, look, let's work together for greater good. Let's actually share openly. Over the last 2 years or so, we have actually worked incredibly well looking at opportunities and how we can support development of micro-credentials in Canada and Denmark. And certainly it's really encouraging in our recent conversations with our colleagues in Aarhus. They are looking to proceed at pace in terms of responding to some of the systemic change that will occur post-COVID, and looking to exploit, I guess, this is, I think, a fast forward button for us in a lot of ways in terms of the future of education. So I hope, Don, that was what you had in mind in terms of a bit of an overview of Edubits. And like I say, I wanted to give you a bit of a case example of a particular Edubit that we have completed in the commercial context. For us, what's ahead? We're really focusing now on one of the key learnings we've had, in particular to a business to customer approach is that we're probably a bit early to effectively communicate the value of assessment-only micro-credentialings to the micro-credentials to the general public. We are looking to link those to tangible learning opportunities, and in particular in the New Zealand context, there's a funding advantage to do that. So that's our key objective at the moment, is to take advantage of that opportunity. And ROVID, as we call it, is driving us firmly in that direction. Certainly, the commercial opportunities of embedding assessment-only RPL-based micro-credentials into a corporate training context, we are continuing to work with that. But the signals from this industry are probably, it's probably going to be a more measured approach in terms of their investment over time. But we need to be ready to respond to that, because I think the wheel's going to turn rather quickly on that thinking. Obviously, training and marketing are the first things you cut when you're actually a little bit worried about the future. But the value that this provides for companies, I think will actually drive people back into that space relatively quickly. Anyway, that's us. That's what we do down here.
That's great. So if you can unshare, that'd be great. Yeah, just say that was totally off topic, but thanks very much anyway. Just kidding. It was great. I've got sprained fingers from trying to keep up, making notes from what you were talking about, and we picked up some questions. I guess some of them from me. To sort of round things up, this has been wonderful, and I know a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this. It really picks up on some of the themes I was able to glean from speaking with you earlier, and take some further. So thank you very much for that. So some questions, and some of these are, I don't know, lost leaders or shill type questions, I guess you might say. So first one from me. For your use case, why would top sales staff, who are already typically well recognized with lots of money, whatever, why would they be interested in badges?
Well, interestingly, because this sales team tended to not hold a higher level of qualification. So these were sales professionals who pretty much entered sales from high school. So this was their first, sort of, in a lot of cases, their first recognition of a high-level qualification. But because it was the way in which our partner organisation actually positioned it, this was a representation of the elite, and the way the badge was designed, its look and feel, has a very, it looked like something that you might want. So, yeah. And I think it actually speaks to the power of badging, that even though most of these people were 40-something plus long careers, they still are aspiring to this because of how the organisation positioned it.
Okay, great. So, but also an aspect of formal academic recognition, yes?
Yes, yeah. Because it wasn't, and I don't wish to denigrate badging or badges, particularly not in this forum. But the backing of an educational institution of some standing, that's the sort of the meat on the bone, so to speak.
Great. So you were talking about the evidence in the badges, and there's discussions about evidence and badges, how they need to be based on evidence, but then people typically don't talk about direct versus indirect evidence. So the question I have is, you had to redact a lot of stuff out, but surely somebody had to see the evidence in the badge, and somebody had to make a judgment, and it's not just an algorithm that they got the badge based on the algorithm.
Yeah, there is a person, and this is where, from a business perspective, this is still a fairly manual process. Yes, we talk about digital platforms, and we're talking about online uploading, we're talking about APIs to make things easy, but in effect, we have a person here who has collected evidence, and the person over here who is looking at that evidence against a rubric or against an assessment criteria and saying, does this fit or doesn't it fit? So it's still a very manual, human-centric process. Sorry.
And you're just facilitating the connection between those two humans. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, Serge, you have the next question. I'll just type up Andy's answer here.
Yes. what's not clear to me, everything you said was extremely interesting and reminded me the work I did when I was doing competency-based education. And I was a great fan and NVQ. So basically all the words you use, like and expressions like naturally occurring evidence, I think it was just perfect in terms of what would have been my approach in competency-based education. All the things you said, perfect, okay? 100% with you. What is not clear for me is what do open badges bring except to be a digital credential? I think it would be interesting to have a conversation around that. But from what you have said, everything about competency-based education is there, but badges, okay, you could have a paper certificate. Basically, it is an online version of a paper certificate that was delivered before, because well, I was a great fan of NVQs in the UK. So I can find myself in everything you said, but I don't see badges here yet.
Yeah, and I think, Serge, it's what does it mean beyond, like you say, that just effectively an online shareable certificate of skill. It's no different in a lot of ways in terms of our approach. And I think that's the challenge is how do you bring that into a framework of understanding? What do people value? How does this particular badge represent against this badge, and how do people make sense of it? So I'm wondering whether that might be the solution might be in that question.
I don't know. I think what I can see from my point of view, knowing badges now, okay, would be to see, okay, as a credential delivering organization, you had an intervention within a company where you elicited what was good practice and embedded it to a badge. So, and then this badge is a reference point for the organization and everybody. So basically what you have done is with the badge is documenting good practice. And then it is shared within the organization. And then you could imagine that peers are recognizing each other's, that they could be endorsed by clients. And because the whole thing about badges, it is a living creature. And so basically what you have created is the conditions, you have made the practice into a format that is recognizable by all the people working in that company. But then you have not used the dynamic within the company, except maybe for managers doing observations, but the idea of peers and a community of peers and to be part of a community of peers is not elicited here. No. I think the idea, you said people want to have a badge because they want to have a formal kind of a formal credential. We have been accredited by university, and then, wow, that's great. And maybe that has a value for that. But I think there is more to dig into what you have done.
I think you're 100% right, Serge. We certainly are not at the end of our journey, and we do not have, I guess, the solution to this. And this is actually, I think, the challenge for education generally, is how do we address equity and access? And open badges is obviously one methodology around that. But for us, I was, I guess, trying to elicit an example of how this fitted into, I guess, in essence, a real world context. But there are some limitations to the approach. I accept that.
It's an interesting. Just to finish with that, for me, it is a very good example of recognition of a practice. That is, you didn't start with a competency framework that was designed by some expert and then they had to align to that. Basically, you recognize the practice, and so it was a kind of collective recognition as well. So it was a collective recognition of a practice by a community. and you embedded it into a badge. You made it visible through a badge, this practice. You made this practice, you documented it with a badge. But so, because one of the reproaches we have with recognition of prior learning, you recognize against the standards that have been defined 10 years ago. My understanding of what you did, maybe I'm wrong, is you recognized a practice within a company.
Yeah.
And so you brought the academic, I don't like much rigor, because rigor, it could be rigor mortis, okay? But you brought the academic rigor of recognition. You make visible this practice. And I think this is, for me, the most exciting part. I want to read what you did with my view. And I think what you did is brilliant in terms of recognition of prior practice, of recognition of a practice. That would be my vision of it.
Yeah, it's more emergent, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So this reminds me of some early discussions with IBM, who were saying that we're a huge global organization. We don't share information very well within the organization. So if we have a shop in Malaysia who comes up with a cool way of a cool new technology or business process, what if they just published a badge about it and started teaching people about it? It reminds me of that. Which is not quite the same thing, but again, it gets at that idea of emergence and making visible and sharing. Yeah.
And it's the problem that you've got when you're actually dealing with corporate, a global corporate. They want to own it and they want to limit. So, open and closed is I guess the issue. They certainly want to, for them, it's about return on investment.
Right. Great. Okay. Is there another one? Sorry. Justin has one.
Destination.
Yeah.
Justin.
Is that the brown one? Is his? Yeah. Well, we'll take that one. Is that Justin who wrote that? Yeah. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah. So the question is just, do you foresee opportunities for this approach to be used with smaller organizations too? The project you described is with a very large organization, and that makes perfect sense. I think because, like you say, it's important for the university to kind of delve deep and understand the organization's problems. And challenges. I'm wondering if you foresee opportunities for this with smaller organizations too.
Yes, absolutely. We work with a wide range of institutions from 3 employees to 10,000. So the key element around this is is this a problem they want to solve? From that perspective, there is a degree of cost in terms of actually putting this in place, because you are doing an extra step. You're asking your employees to do something more. You're doing something more, and you're also paying us not an exorbitant amount of money, but you are paying us as well. So firms need to have a problem they want to solve, and they see value in solving that problem. So it's actually irrelevant of size and scale. It's really about, do they want to solve a problem?
Yeah, and are they prepared to pay for it? And actually that sort of surfaces something for me. I remember from our previous conversation, and perhaps it was with you or with Phil, where basically you guys will often go to a company and offer them an evaluation gratis of a department, how it's working, and sort of say, here's what we see at a very high level. Here's what we think we could do with this. And if that's all, if you don't want to do anything, that's fine. Here's the evaluation. See you later. But then what you have then is a roadmap for improvement, that gap filling, et cetera.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. In effect.
Right. So my question, this flips back to my question, is in a COVID era where there's a lot less face-to-face, a lot more online collaboration, that Salesforce thing is possibly an example. But in what ways would the virtualization of work change what you're doing in terms of analysis and delivery and recognition?
Obviously, Sarah could speak to this relatively readily as well. Certainly from an institutional perspective, there was the knee-jerk was, gosh, we can't operate in the way we've always expected to. The students cannot come to us because they will die. So what we've obviously had over a period of time is, quite a very short period of time, is a reset in terms of how we deliver education generally. For a lot of organisations, well, particularly ours, that's then there has been a lot of soul searching around what do we need to be doing and what could be done better from what we've learned. And I think at the moment we're sort of racing to distill our experience into, and hopefully not putting the rigor mortis into rigor around this. I love that phrase. I'm going to borrow it freely.
O-U-R, not O-R. Okay, just...
Yeah, I know, yes. And actually pragmatically apply it quickly. Because, in some instances, you look at SNHU, who are obviously now going to a fully online delivery, even for on-campus students, and reducing tuition from 31K to 10K. So from that perspective, you can see some very radical and rapid approaches based on what we've just been through. I think there's that, but there's not. This isn't just in terms of people coming to us for the solution. I think there's a relationship between education and learners that we need to unbundle and provide tools and assistance in terms of a lifelong relationship with education. And there's plenty of stuff out there that could actually start to be the building blocks for that kind of relationship.
Don, can I comment on that too?
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, Andy, and I think that it actually links some of what Serge was also saying about equity. And I think that one of the things that we are forced at this point to do, which is a good thing, I think, is to assess how institutions view learning and value learning, and that we can actually extend equity in learning through micro-credentialing, through the model that Edubits suggests, because it means that we are not as precious about our own instance of learning. So we recognize learning where it can occur. In COVID, the numbers of people who were sitting at home taking edX courses and Coursera courses and things, just trying to keep themselves preoccupied for a little while, let alone to try to upskill or reskill, was significant, and probably is still significant. If we could view the opportunity as being to credential that learning that people have taken, regardless of whether they've taken it with us as an institution, then we start to promote that relationship between industry and institutions, where the industry endorses our credential validates the learning and the competency that has been acquired. And to me, that allows for individuals who've never had or have limited opportunity to participate in post-secondary or other forms of education to be participants.
That's great. I was even diving further into the weeds and saying, in an increasingly virtualized workplace, how does that sort of recognition of what needs to be learned, what needs to be recognized, how will that change? And the specific example I have is, Shopify, this big global commercial entity, has said, well, our new normal, is virtual rather than the office. So what they're saying is only come into the office when you have to. And so then there are all these skills about staying engaged and staying socially connected, and et cetera, et cetera. How does that change? Plus analysis of, whether people are being productive and, what products are being developed, et cetera. So that's essentially, to me, it's a slightly nerdier question, I guess.
No, and it's an interesting point, Don, because one of the first things, because you can imagine executive teams across the world going, what do we develop first? And there's sort of almost a race to the bottom in terms of content, and particularly in New Zealand, where you get one chance to fill the gap on the framework. I think there was a drive initially to say, we need to actually look at, say, online retailing, online sales delivery. And I think you've got to really look at, you know, there's micro learning and micro credentialing, right? They're quite distinct actions. Is there value in people being upskilled to do their job, and that's just great, or to adjust to the new normal? That's you know, certainly people need to be trained now on using new digital platforms or a different way to work. Is there value in that being credentialed? I.e., is there a third party out there that's going to value seeing that in the manifestation of a badge, whatever that might be? And that's really what you've got to give it a good solid knock with a cricket bat, some of these ideas, in terms of whether they'll fly or not as credentials. Plenty of good learning that can be applied, but doesn't need to be credentialed.
Right. Okay. No, that's great. So we've gone over. Does anybody have any sort of final questions or comments? But I'm mindful of Andy's time, although I think you still have a few hours before your real day starts. So.
I may go back and catch a couple of links at this point, but
exactly.
But I'm pretty wired at this point, and no coffee has been engaged. So
oh wow,
even Sarah would be surprised at that.
Oh, you didn't have anybody who had the skills. Is that it? Is that?
I couldn't get anyone else to get up.
That's funny. So thank you very much for this, Andy. And I guess just another something to put on your radar, the Serge, if you can talk about the virtual Epic again, briefly.
The new TS October 26-28 will have Epic, and it will be 72 hours across 3 continents. And so we're looking for partners in Asia, of course, America. We have Noah Geisel, the organizer of the Batch Summit, who agreed to be part of the organization. Of course, Dan, who's in Canada. Justin, who's here, might want to help as well. So 72 hours worldwide. Uninterrupted flow of conversations. So French, English, and probably Spanish. We'd like to have translation in Spanish as well, at least during the time we're in America. So looking forward to...
So we have a contact in Australia already, Serge, or not?
Yes, we have, but
New Zealand not, so that would be great.
New contact is welcome.
Great. Your contact has been acquired. I think you've just found me, so we'll work our way through that.
All right, sounds great. Thanks very much again, Andy.
Pleasure, guys.
All right,
thank you.
Bye all.
Very good.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye, Brenda. Sorry, we missed talking to you. Bye bye.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.